Hey, Chem2, Andy here. Why are you happy? Well, you might say, that's a stupid question. It's just because I saw a dog, a baby, or maybe even just a cookie. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that this really isn't the case at all. These feelings are on more of a chemical level than anything else. And specifically, this mood of happiness is primarily caused by serotonin or dopamine. Now, hold up a minute. We're forgetting about dopamine for this video. We're just going to be focusing on the awesome serotonin. Now, to understand what it is, what it does for you, and where you can really find it, also a few bits about the history and what we use it for today, sit back, relax, eat some popcorn, and enjoy the beautiful world of serotonin.
So we're going to start out with some basic chemical information on serotonin. Now, the real scientific name for it is 5-hydroxytryptamine, or 5-HT for short. And the chemical formula of serotonin is C10H12N2O, and the molar mass of it is 176.215 grams per mole. It also consists of double, single, hydrogen, and covalent bonds.
Next, you kind of need to know where serotonin is located in the body to know what its function is and why it does that. So the main part, or the main place serotonin is located is the intestinal tract. And these pink wires kind of show you what the intestinal tract looks like, but it's also found in the brain, blood platelets that are all over your body, and the central nervous system. So now that you know where to find serotonin, it's time to explain why it's there. So for the intestinal tract, serotonin is there to help bowel movements. So the more serotonin you have in your intestines, the faster the food gets from here down to there. So too much serotonin can be a bad thing, but too little can also cause constipation. Now, this kind of explains why the stomach flu happens. If you eat something bad, like a bad meat, it'll go into your intestines, your body will be like, whoa, I need to get this out of me fast. So it's going to increase the amount of serotonin that it produces in your gut. So the food passes through you faster, so that makes you poop, causing diarrhea. So that's something that helps your body, but it's also something that you don't really enjoy. That's the function of why it's there. And the last use of serotonin is to kind of improve your sexual function. Now I'm just going to stop right there, because it's not really appropriate for school, so yeah.
As for the history of serotonin, we have to go back to the first discoveries that came with it, which were made in 1868 when scientists Ludwig and Schmidt experimented with anticoagulants in dog blood. They discovered that the coagulated blood had increased vascular tension, making the two hypothesize that something had to be in the blood to cause this. Then, a whole another 44 years later, in 1912, a scientist named O'Connor came along and said that this coagulant was released during the coagulation process in the blood instead of being there all the time. 20 years after that discovery, from 1932 until 1942, scientists discovered how to isolate this coagulating substance from the blood. Finally, in the glorious year of 1949, serotonin got its chemical formula and its name. From the time of its discovery, scientists were mainly focused on seeing how it could be used for humans, in which they did extensive studies on dogs, cats, cows, and even rats to find out how it could be useful to us. From their studies, they found that it can make people happier, have better bowel digestion, and also how it helped to clot blood around wounds.
So now that you know a little bit about the past history of serotonin, it's time to get into what it's used for today. Now, the most popular thing that it's used for today is antidepressants. And these uses of antidepressants using serotonin can date all the way back to 1957, which could be used in the history, but 1957 is considered the modern age of serotonin usage. And it was used back then in the form of LSDs. Yes, LSDs. The thing we think of to make us all go loopy nowadays, but they were really used and they were actually good for antidepressants back then. But in the 1970s, they created something called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or less of a mouthful, SSRIs. Now, to explain these antidepressant drugs, I'm going to hand it over to my boys at ASAP Science to explain this complicated form of medicine.
When we look at the brain of a depressed person, studies show that the hippocampus tends to be much smaller than average. Other areas of the brain are also physically affected, but this region in particular controls memory and emotion. And the longer a person has been depressed, the smaller the hippocampus becomes. The cells and networks literally deteriorate. It turns out that stress may actually be a main trigger in the decrease of new neurons in this area of the brain. In fact, studies have shown that when this region of the brain is regenerated and new neurons are stimulated, mood improves. Interestingly, many modern drugs, including those which affect serotonin levels, have an indirect effect on the growth of brain cells. This is likely why serotonin-based drugs seem to help some patients, but not for the reasons we once thought. Instead, they promote the release of other chemicals which ultimately stimulate neurogenesis or the growth of new neurons. Knowing this, some scientists now believe focus should be on drugs which directly affect neurogenesis.
So as mentioned before in the video, serotonin is also used to speed up bowel processes. So it is actually used in laxatives. So if you're having trouble pooping, you have to scoot and grab yourself some serotonin, you'll be pooping. Sorry that you had to hear that. But in all seriousness, we do have a lot of uses for serotonin nowadays, but the real question is, what can we use it for in the future?
Well, you see, there aren't really many new things that we can use serotonin for in the future because we're just trying to improve the effectiveness of the problems that we've already discovered. However, there are recent studies performed on rats that show how serotonin-increasing drugs could be used to cure pulmonary hypertension, which is a disease that affects arteries in the lungs and heart, that affects young babies and older adults. But besides that, we've really used it to its full potential.
In conclusion, serotonin has a very wide variety of uses, from helping you poop, to making you happy, to even healing up some wounds, which is why it's become one of my favorite compounds of the human body. But anyways, this has been Andy, thanks for watching Chem 2.